Crimson Desert. This is the upcoming game from Pearl Abyss, the developers of Black Desert Online, and it has excited people for a long time. Ever since it was first revealed in this trailer you're seeing here in 2019, it's been on some people's radars. And over the last 5 years or so, as they've developed it further and further, people have gotten the chance to play it. People have gotten the chance to do previews, and with it set to release next year at some point, people are, dare I say, excited. And in this video, we're gonna look at the game skeptically and evaluate whether or not it's fair to be excited for this. And little spoiler alert, I think it is, because this looks really good. Not perfect, but still really good. But before we get into that, a thank you to the sponsor of this video, New World Eternum. New World Eternum is the upcoming ARPG coming to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC on October 15th, with an open beta running right now. They've done all sorts of stuff like adding cross-platform support so you can play with your friends across platforms. They've increased the gear score. They've added new 10-player raids, new endgame content to work through, along with other things like DirectX 12 rendering, and swimming is in the game now, all sorts of stuff. So if you want to check it out on one of their fresh start worlds, experience some of the all-new cinematic stories, or just jump back into New World with a bunch of quality of life improvements and balance updates, you can try the game right now this weekend during the open beta through September 16th, and then you can keep an eye out for the official launch on October 15th. Again, links and everything below if you want to try the game for free this weekend and see what some of those quality of life improvements are like. And we're back, ladies and gents. So Crimson Desert, as I said, was announced back in 2019. In this trailer you can see here. Now, since it was revealed, it has changed, and frankly, I think there have been a couple of downgrades that we've seen in terms of facial animation quality, in terms of cinematics and stuff like that. But on the whole, the game seems much more real now than it did in this original 2019 trailer, which got a lot of attention, but people kind of forgot about it because there was, let's just say, like a couple big events between 2019 and today. Yeah, some stuff went on. But even still, this trailer did a really good job of showing why people were excited for it. There's all sorts of monsters, werewolves, vampires, there's goblins in the forests, there's dragons and ogres and giants. I mean, it really is a fantastical world, which seems to have been built by a team previously only known for creating an MMO. But in the last couple of years, we've gotten further trailers that showcased what I think is a much more fair representation of what the game will actually look like and run like when it releases. While the facial animation quality is a little bit lower, they certainly seem to make up for it in terms of dynamics, with destructible environments, with lots of enemies on screen, particle effects out the ever-living ass, and very large set pieces and levels, as you can see on screen right here. This trailer in particular was shown at opening night live for Gamescom last year, and it was so impressive that the chief complaint about it was that it was too good looking. The game looked so good, people were like, there is no way that this is coming from a relatively unknown studio, if you're not familiar with Black Desert Online, and people got really excited, though they maintained what I would consider to be a healthy level of skepticism because it looked too good to be true. And I will just say, if you ever find yourself developing a video game and people's primary complaint is that it looks too good to be true, that's a good problem to have, so long as your game is actually real. You know, if we're dealing with like a day before situation, then we might be in trouble. But if you actually do have this game put together and you can share it with people, you probably have something special on your hands. And to their credit, they have actually been very transparent with the footage that they have and with the demos that they have, even so far as opening it up for 45-minute to hour-long demos at various events like Gamescom just even a few weeks ago. And in preparation for this video, I actually spoke with a handful of people that got to play that demo at Gamescom, and I collected their thoughts and the thoughts of other people that made videos and discussions about it on outlets like IGN or GameSpot or similar outlets like that, and I've put it all together and tried to evaluate as fairly as I can what this game actually is. Crimson Desert, based on what has been playable to people thus far, seems to be an amalgamation of various different design philosophies, specifically those that are born out of their experience in MMO development. It also takes inspiration from games like The Witcher 3 and Assassin's Creed, specifically the most recent ones, which were the big open world adventure games. And it takes a couple of other very obvious inspirations from games like Tears of the Kingdom. Notably, in this 50-minute section of gameplay that they dropped just a couple of days ago when I'm recording this video, you can see that they take straight up the dive from the Sky Islands that they did in Tears of the Kingdom and put it in here. And this is something that allegedly the game will feature a lot of, is a lot of verticality, the ability to fly in hot air balloons over the map and then basically skydive down with a glider that's inspired by, my understanding is it's a god that is based on crows, which is why you'll see the effect in a moment when he activates it. But it's a vast world that they are encouraging you to explore in many, many different ways. And the seamless transitions from sky down to surface is wildly impressive. And it's not something that many games are able to do even partially. Like, the fact that they're just casually doing it while maintaining a decent level of graphical fidelity is very, very impressive. Now, this may be one of those things where you think it looks too good to be true, which is, I think, a perfectly reasonable feeling to have, especially in light of how lackluster a lot of games have been recently in terms of technical performance. But this is once again a reason why it's nice to see that they're actually making the demos available. They're actually doing these gameplay demos in front of people where it's running in real time. To be perfectly clear, it's expected that this is running on probably a very high-end PC with a controller plugged in, and that's why they're getting decent performance. And another one of the perhaps more interesting tidbits of this is that we've actually gotten a very good and extensive look at some gameplay elements. We don't really know moment to moment what will be going on, but we do know that in terms of combat, this is a very robust game. And the way that they've chosen to demonstrate that is with a demo that was available at Gamescom where people could try basically up to 4 boss fights if they could get through them in the allotted time. And these boss fights are anything from like an abominable snowman with antlers, or another like a soldier archetype or a goblin archetype, and different boss fight styles like that. But as you can see, these are pretty large set piece fights, and they are expected to be fairly organic while you're exploring the world. They want you to be able to find these things as you're just exploring. So it's not something that only happens during like main quests and things like that. Whether that ends up being the case at the end of the day remains to be seen, but it does seem like they have a lot of fights available and they're pretty varied. Even this one you can see is purely chaotic with how much is going on with the snow and particle effects everywhere. And even like the hair simulation on the body of the creature is wildly impressive. And as you fight him and you draw blood, you see the fur turn more to a crimson, and it turns darker and darker and actually gets bloodied. It's very, very impressive. And this is one point where I do want to take a moment to just point something out that I think can be ground for unfair evaluation and critique. And that is what is known as compression. By my metrics, with these types of videos that I make, anywhere from 70 to 80% of people watch these videos on their phones or just a mobile device. They're not watching it on a big TV or on their PC or something like that. As a result, YouTube tends to default to a lower bitrate and a lower resolution by default, unless you press that little gear icon up there and change it to a higher fidelity quality level, basically. And even then, on a small phone like screen, it's hard to make out individual details. Even once you crank that quality, you kind of have to zoom in and look specifically, like I can do here. Like if I go here and I actually zoom in on certain parts of this frame, we can find pixelization, we can find compression artifacts and stuff like that. But that is not indicative of how the game actually will look when you're playing it uncompressed, coming straight off of your PC. And this is notoriously a problem with footage from companies like IGN, for example, where they will upload footage of the latest 4K 60 whatever game, and their footage is at 1080p and looks like it was encoded at 460p. So I think it's really important to note that sometimes compression can make games like this look a lot worse than they actually are. Sometimes you do have instances where you can spot artifacting that is not video compression, that maybe is an artifact of things like FSR upscaling on consoles and things like that, which you can see in games like Black Myth Wukong, where there's sort of a checkerboard pattern across certain areas of the screen. In those instances, You can spot it, you can point it out. It makes it way harder when it's also overly compressed and lacking in detail. But in this particular footage that you can see right here, coming directly from the Crimson Desert YouTube channel, you can see it looks far, far better than the same footage that was posted to other outlets, channels like IGN or GameSpot or whoever else. So really make sure to pay attention to where you're watching the footage and which quality level you have it set to. Otherwise, you may unfairly think that the game doesn't look as crisp or clear as it should, when in reality it looks like this. It's just been compressed 15 times over and it doesn't make it look as good as it possibly could. And this is topical because just recently, the other day, with the announcement of the PS5 Pro, Sony hired CNET to do the big like gameplay reveal of the console and to show some extended footage and stuff. And in this video that they did, like they show footage and stuff showing, like, look at this. Okay, we go back a few frames. They have 60 FPS at 4K on Pro mode. What do you notice about this? The max quality is 1080p and it runs at 30 frames. Like, I'm not joking. They hired CNET to reveal their cutting edge high-tech console. And the whole point of the console is that it can do really high quality at 4K 60 allegedly, or just 4K 30, but still 4K at the very least. And then these guys they hired to basically do a puff piece on the game or on the console, they put it out at 1080p 30, which is like 2012 levels of quality. It's unbelievable. So watch out, because you'd think that like professional journalists and stuff that cover gaming would understand resolution, bitrate, and frame rate and stuff, but they never cease to amaze me. So don't assume anything. But back to Crimson Desert, the footage you can actually get directly off of their channels, not from a partner media site that's overly compressed it on their end. Their footage looks way sharper and is actually pretty impressive. Make of it what you will, because again, this is almost certainly running on very high-end PC hardware. If you are fortunate enough to be spoiled and have like a 4090 or whatever, then awesome. But don't expect like a 2070 to run the game in this quality level at this frame rate and resolution. Okay, so just trying to be as fair and straightforward as we can. It seems like if you have the firepower to do it, you can get it looking and running very, very well, but you're going to need that firepower. But perhaps the point of all of this is just to say that in the past, when we've seen games that look too good to be true, like so good that they might be faking some gameplay and some footage, typically they keep it hidden away and they do not make it available for people to test, certainly. But in this case, with Crimson Desert, the devs have actually gone out of their way to make the game more and more available to more and more people, taking it to things like Gamescom. If they wanted to keep it exclusively at like Summer Game Fest, where only select few journalists could try it and check it out, they could have done that. But no, they're taking it to like public shows like Gamescom to let thousands and thousands of people check it out, which to me is a very, very good sign, because you can't fake that type of demo in front of that many people. Instead, you know, if you're being that transparent with it, it's probably because there's actually a there's something here to actually show, which is very encouraging. And that, like, look at that. How cool is that? Like, it's just a very dynamic encounter, and verticality's introduced. It seems to run pretty well. Like, again, just very, very impressive, very smooth gameplay. But look, each of these things are what could probably be described as like keynote showcases, or just that showcases. These are individual encounters or boss fights that are made to look as good or compelling as they can be, but it doesn't really tell you what the connective tissue is. This is one of the things I said about Black Myth Wukong, where like obviously the boss fights looked awesome and beautiful and smooth, but we weren't clear what was actually going to happen between boss fights. What was the connective tissue between those really cool moments? Because some amazing games can be held back just by having poor connective tissue. Making the runs between really good boss fights a trudge can be enough to bring it from a 9 out of 10 down to like an 8 or down to a 7, which is where it seems like it landed for a lot of people, in that like 8 to 8.5 range. And so while Crimson Desert looks really good in those set pieces, what are you going to be doing from moment to moment in between those big set piece fights and encounters? Well, normally we would just be left to wonder, but in this case, they've actually released like an hour of gameplay just for people to check out and see. as you can see on screen here, just showing what you'll be doing while you're playing roughly an hour of the game, completing various quests. And they show a few different things here. You know, IGN did a preview of this, discussing it in more detail, and they pointed out some interesting things. So for example, individual quests that you'll get in a given area could have overlapping consequences or overlapping causes that could be resolved with one action. I know that sounds really, really vague and not that helpful. So let me explain it with the most powerful tool ever created by man, MS Paint. If we have, say, like a castle, okay, and in this castle there is a quest for you to get, okay, you pick up the quest. They tell you, and this is what IGN's example was, that there has perhaps been a series of raids conducted by somebody in the middle of the night, and when they attack, the air is filled with a red smoke and it causes confusion, and it's very, very strange, but it's very, very unique as well. You might take that quest on, listen to that dialogue and go, okay, interesting. I'll put a pin in it. We'll revisit that in a minute, but I want to go look around the rest of the town. And then you explore the outskirts of the town, and maybe you find another quest that's popped where there's maybe some farmers who are talking about how somebody broke into their barn and stole some of their sheep or something like that. They could also tell you some little tidbit like, yeah, they broke in the middle of the night. And you could try to connect those two, be like, okay, 2 raids in the middle of the night, they're stealing stuff. Sounds like bandits to me. Maybe it's connected, maybe it's not, probably not. Most video games don't do that, but I'll go look around. And then you start pursuing this quest. And it turns out that they actually share the same cause, which is a camp of like goblin bandits who throw these sort of red smoke bombs to confuse people when they attack them. And when you fight at that encampment, you actually see the red smoke going off and you can connect the two. And it turns out that that was the cause of both of these problems. And you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone by taking out that camp. And I personally think this is really, really cool, because typically in open world design and with a lot of these bigger games, they basically create quests kind of individually, and then they just sprinkle them throughout the world and toss them about. There's not a whole lot of careful intentionality with how things overlap and intertwine, because that's just a lot to handle when you just want to be able to hand one quest designer this area of the map, fill 5 or 6 quests in, and then this guy goes over there, builds some quests over there, and you just kind of try to spread through the map as quickly as you can with as many high quality quests as you can, certainly, but there's not often that much room for intertwining the stories. But in Crimson Desert, at least the parts that these people got to try and see in more detail, they said there were quests where there were multiple instances or effects of different problems. So you might hear multiple people talking about a problem with like a monster or a giant bear that's been causing them trouble. And you could pick up 1 or 2 quests that have the same problem, and you can fix both quests and solve those problems for those people by defeating one enemy or by taking on one narrative quest line and taking care of that, resolving it, solving all of the cascading quests that are associated with it. It's a cool concept, and I personally like this. Now, to be perfectly fair, there is a potential downside to this, which is that basically you could have a bunch of quest lines in a given area, and you look at it and you're like, oh God, there's so much to do, so many quests. But it's very possible that it's just because these quest lines have like the same origin, and so they're basically just the same quest line with different starting dialogue in effect. And so it may seem like there's a ton of different quest lines, but in reality, there's only a few like tasks to be completed. It just seems much more compelling at first. So there is a potential downside to this, but I think the upside seems compelling as well. So it's just another instance where we'll have to wait and see when we actually play the game. But I do like that choice to make these quest lines more interconnected, because it does make sense. If you were in like an open world environment in a fantasy realm, it would make sense that if there were a camp of bandits nearby, they would be causing trouble for more than just a guy or more than just this one farmer over there. Makes sense that they'd be causing lots of ruckus and trouble for everybody around. So I like it in concept. I like the idea. Now, a couple of other things that were referenced in the IGN previews and in some of the developer interviews that have also happened. is things like the scope of the world. Obviously, as you can see on screen, it's vast, and their goal is to go for something on a scale that you would typically only see in like a big MMO game, but with single player quality and interactivity and dynamism, which I think again is really, really cool to see. There's also been discussions over the minutia of combat, and it does seem that the people who have tried it say it feels really, really good to play, in addition to just looking cool and being pretty polished when you're watching it secondhand. But when you actually play it yourself, there is a lot of depth there, which you would hope to see coming from a team that has been building like an MMO for years and years and years, that they would understand things like long-term progression and development of a character, but it seems like they've also pulled it off here, which is awesome. One interesting thing they noted is that there is apparently no camera lock-on at all, even in like individual boss fights, which is a choice that some other games have made. Like I think Dragon's Dogma 2 also did that, but it's just an interesting choice. You know, I'm not really sure why they would make that choice in this particular instance. At least in Dragon's Dogma, it's like, oh, there's these big monsters, and so, you know, you need to target specific limbs or stuff at different times in the fight. So having a camera lock on could lead to more trouble than it's worth, where maybe you're locking onto their head when you need to lock onto the beast's body or legs or left leg or right leg. So maybe this is just, you know, quality of life choice where they just found that it didn't feel that much better to play with a lock on. I don't really know. Maybe they added in later, but I did think that was an interesting choice to make. You know, it's not what I would have expected, because it seems like if it doesn't fit the situation, you just don't use the lock on. But then again, I've seen some people playing games like Elden Ring, for example, with the camera locked on, even when it makes their life way, way more difficult. You know, it's like, just turn it off. I swear the fight will be easier. But some people just leave it on all the time. So maybe it's just something like that where they just figured, we'll help people, you know, just don't bother. But even here, like in this fight sequence that you can see, I'm just still taken away when you just take a moment to look in the distance at some of the detail that's here. Like there's a gigantic, I don't know if that's a cathedral or what. There's a huge tower in the distance. There's ruins over here. And this is something that it's really hard to pull off, but basically you want to make sure that at any given moment when you're playing an open world game, off in the distance, there's something that catches your attention, something that makes you say, ooh, I wonder what's over there. I wonder what's in that cave. I wonder what's in this temple. I wonder what's in these ruins. And if you can pull that off, it's really easy to get lost in the game. It's why I've said with some open world games, I find them easy to play, not because they're not difficult or challenging in terms of gameplay, but because it's easy to just boot it up and lose yourself in it, you know? That's how I felt with games like Red Dead 2, for example, where, you know, I'm just like, oh, I'll boot it up and I'll just go do a hunt real quick just for fun on a Friday night. There's no other games that have released. I'll just do that. It seems like a good time. And 3 hours pass and I find myself sitting in a theater in Saint Denis watching a magic show. And I'm like, what the hell happened? You know, it's really easy to get lost in. That is something that's very, very difficult to pull off when it comes to open world design. But in this case, it does seem like there are seeds of very promising high potential design choices here. And given their experience in the MMO world, I'm optimistic. Again, we won't really know until we play the game, because that's just something you can't really test for or hear about in previews. It's something you'll experience yourself when you're playing the game for hours and hours and hours on end. But it seems like they're doing things right based on the footage that I'm seeing here. But okay, you're probably waiting for the shoe to drop and for me to discuss some of the potential shortcomings of the game, which I am happy to do now, because no game is perfect. There's always potential little hiccups or issues you might have, you know, even a game that you might be really excited for, like GTA 6. I'll bet you a good chunk of change that game is almost certainly going to be CPU bound, just like the Digital Foundry guys were saying. And as a result, probably it's going to run at 30 frames at launch, even on your PS5 Pro. And as a result of that, I think that is a shortcoming. That's a downside, you know, a negative thing for GTA 6. I would say the rest of the game, you know, if that's here, the rest of the positives are probably way up here. So it definitely outweighs the bad. But with even like the biggest budget, most amazing games, there's usually one or two things you can point out that are detriments to it. And so I'll bring these up here, but I don't want you to get it twisted and think that therefore the game is bad or we should shun it or something. Because with all of these evaluations of any game, when we do it skeptically, we're trying to be fair and acknowledge the good and then also acknowledge the bad and weigh how it balances out. And some of these potential downsides may be very, very small, but some of the upside could be very, very big, or vice versa. That's why we evaluate them as critically and fairly as we can, so that we don't end up just being negative pricks who are like, oh, well, the game looks amazing, but the lack of clarity in the grass is not impressing me, so I guess I'm gonna wait for a deep sale. I don't think that's fair. Anyway, let's get to that specifically. First and foremost, in the footage that we have, it does seem like they are relying on upscalers pretty aggressively to hit decent frame rate targets. If you look at the original announcement footage from 2019, the game is ridiculously sharp. There's no sign of any upscaling at all, as you would expect. I mean, this was 2019, well before like DLSS and everything came onto the scene. And it looks really, really sharp and crisp no matter where you look in the frame, because this was almost certainly rendering natively in real time. However, the game, in my opinion, doesn't look quite this good now. It looks much more, I'd say, realistic to what you'd expect for a game of this type, but it still is look at that. That's just crazy cool. Like, this is why people got excited, because this footage is really, really awesome. Whether they can pull this off, remains to be seen, but it does look wildly impressive. You can see why people got hyped for it, but I don't think it looks this crisp today, in my humble opinion. I appreciate that they have made adjustments to make it capable of running in real time more realistically, but still. Now, another thing to bring up is the writing. This is, again, a single player game. They're not doing any multiplayer or MMO stuff for it. It's a single player game. And so as a result, the narrative is going to be fairly important. However, the people who have tried it, and of course, everybody who has watched these longer gameplay segments, will tell you that the individual dialogue and quest writing and the main story stuff seems fairly convoluted, and it doesn't flow as well as I would hope. Even a company like IGN came out and said that they were not that impressed with the dialogue writing in their preview time and in their big preview video that they did, which I'm just gonna say, elephant in the room, IGN, they're the guys that gave Dustborn a 7 out of 10. And that game had some of the most migraine and diarrhea inducing writing I've ever seen in the games industry. And I played Saints Row Reboot. I've played Forspoken. I've seen some stuff, and they gave that game a 7 and are saying that this game's writing is a little iffy. So, make of that what you will, but I don't think this will be on that level where Dustborn is just actively making you lose your mind. I think in this case, probably what we see is just not that impressive of writing, or kind of lackluster fantasy writing, or dialogue that's just a little clunky and generic fantasy. And that's probably fine. I expect that this is one of those games you play for the gameplay and the open world exploration. I'm not expecting to have any intense moments of role play or immersion like a Kingdom Come game, which is fine. If anything, I find it encouraging almost to see that there are shortcomings to this game. If everything about it was coming out as yep, it's the second coming of Jeff Keighley, it's going to be amazing, and everybody should be super, super pumped for it, I'd be a little bit more worried that maybe there was some other shoe that was going to fall at some point. But in this case, it seems like it's a really solid open world game with a pretty good combat system and cool dynamics with monsters and boss fights and stuff. And then the writing and story writing is just not that great. I think that is much more reasonable to expect from this team than them somehow making a Red Dead / Witcher 3 competitor out of nowhere. And speaking of the team, that is another thing to be aware of. This is the team, Pearl Abyss, out of South Korea, that are responsible for Black Desert Online. In this review from Medieval Marty, you can see kind of a revisit to the game in 2024 with modern updates and stuff like that. And the common takeaway is that Black Desert Online is a very competently made game. There's a lot of content there. There's a lot of long-term progress and grind to be played and enjoyed, certainly, but it is monetized out the ever-living ass. It is crazy. It's changed a lot, but even this post from 3 years ago asking how the monetization was compared to 3 years before that, so 6 years ago from today, you can see people describing how, oh, it's semi-free to play. I'm semi-free to play, meaning I paid for an initial boost like weight, trainers, fluid, underwear, hedgehog. I basically spent enough money for a year of $15 a month subscription fees, which I guess in the world of MMOs is not that insane if you're like a WoW player and stuff, but as somebody who primarily plays single player games, that seems insane to me. Just a little crazy. And apparently you can purchase things like pets, outfits, inventory and storage expansions. You can purchase mounts. There's even at times been boosts to different skills or XP collection, items for decorating in-game places of residence, things like that. Like, I haven't played the game. I just have never been that interested, so I'm not overly familiar with it, but what I do know about Black Desert Online is that it is one of the most aggressively monetized MMOs that's out in the world today. But you may be thinking, Luke, what's the relevance of that? Why does that affect the single player game? And I think that that is a very valid question. And it's one I'm still kind of grappling with too, because on the one hand, you would expect if that's how they handled their other big game, what are the odds that they just let this be like the most pro consumer, you buy it, there's nothing else, no DLC, nothing like that. What are the odds that they do that here? I don't think the odds are that great, but then again, today, as of today, there have been no announcements of like XP boosts or like, you know, the Ubisoft style XP enhancement thing that they do, or the ability to buy in-game currency for faster purchasing of better equipment or extra quests that are sold to you or things like that. We haven't heard anything like that. Maybe it's going to be in the game when it launches, maybe not. But I do think it's important to just keep in the back of your head that this company that's making this game certainly has very talented devs behind it, but the reason they're able to afford to make this massive game that's taken them about 7-8 years to put together when all will be said and done is because they are bankrolled by the monetization machine that is Black Desert Online. Maybe this is just their way of breaking into the single player world and they're not going to do any of that here, but I think more likely they do some of that here. Hopefully it just doesn't overstep the bounds and get into the space of being like egregious or hyper aggressive. That's my personal hope, but again, I would just hazard you getting like super pumped and like balls to the walls excited to the point of hype when we still don't know that very crucial bit. I will say in all of the interviews that I've seen, in the discussions that gamers had with some devs at an event like Gamescom, it seems as though there is nothing like that in the game, at least as of right now. There's not any clear plans to do anything like that. So I'm optimistic, but I've been burned before by other companies and, you know, even other games that are pretty solid during the review period will sometimes introduce a store at launch that nobody knew about when they were reviewing the game, you know? So you just never really know until the game's actually out, but that is something to factor in, okay? There's no evidence of it right now, except that they've done it very aggressively in their previous game. But beyond that, we'll just have to wait and see. But where does this leave us at the end of looking at Crimson Desert? My takeaway is that this is a very promising game from a studio that, unless you're familiar with MMOs, has kind of come out of nowhere. And everybody who has tried the game themselves has walked away very excited and intrigued. And if you're interested in these big open world adventure games, maybe not open world RPG games, but open world adventure games, it seems like it's going to be a real treat. It maybe won't have the best writing or the most compelling narrative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like never touch it again. Like, it still could be very well worth playing and checking out despite that. And even then, like, it's really hard to judge a game's narrative at like a 30-minute or 45-minute or hour-long preview. Even extended previews that are like an entire day for media to try a game and check it out. Even at those, like, you're usually playing individual missions and it's not really clear how the story will tie together or how certain characters will develop or if they even will. So it's really hard to gauge writing quality in a preview. And so I don't want to commit to the idea that the narrative is going to be bad, but it seems at the very least that the narrative was not compelling to people when they were trying it and in these previews that they've gotten the chance to see. And it seems like it's just kind of like, which is fine, you know. Lots of people like Assassin's Creed games, for example, and I would argue a lot of the writing in Assassin's Creed games, even as like an Assassin's Creed fan historically, is like at best. So who knows? Who knows? At least for the last like decade, it's been in my opinion. But with all of this, if we're trying to evaluate whether or not you are justified when looking at this skeptically in being excited, I think you are perfectly justified in being excited and intrigued by Crimson Desert. I think it's a game to keep an eye on. It seems like it could very well be something special, and I really hope it is. Not just because I want more good games to play. You know, I feel like there's kind of been a shortage of really solid big budget games recently, but I do hope it's really good because of that, and then also because I think competition is really, really good for the industry. When you have other new developers popping up, blowing everybody's minds, showing what they're capable of, I think that helps the industry stay healthy. I think when Sony is at their best, while Pearl Abyss is doing their best work, and then Game Science is doing their best work, and then Xbox Studios is coming out swinging with some big stuff next year like Doom and all sorts of other stuff like Fable. My hope is that we get to a point next year and then in 2026 where there are a bunch of new players in the space and they are all coming out swinging with massive, ambitious games once again. Because it feels like so far for the first half of this generation, we've pretty much been relying on sort of uninspired sequels or remakes and remasters. And then occasionally we'll get treated to something really, really cool like Baldur's Gate 3, for example. But those are exceptional games because they're just that. They're They're exceptions to the trend that we're used to. And so I hope that this is one of those games that pops off like Black Myth Wukong and is just amazing, and that we all have a new obsession at some point next year when this drops. But I guess time will tell. But you better believe that I'll be keeping a close eye on it, both here on this channel and over on Luke Stevens Live, my second channel here on YouTube. And I also should point out that I also stream over on Twitch. If you're interested, I stream on YouTube and Twitch, and you know, you can watch wherever you're comfortable. But let me know what you think of Crimson Desert. Are you intrigued? Are you interested? Are you, dare I say, hyped for the game? Or is there something that's sticking out to you that you just can't quite put a finger on, or maybe that just is not sold to you just yet? Let me know in the comments, because if I see some interesting stuff, maybe I can try to reach out to the devs or something and get some answers for a follow-up video. But with all that said, we're just gonna have to wait until the game launches next year on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S. That's at least where it's understood to be launching as of today. It seems like it is coming to console and PC. We don't know a lot of specifics, like of course targets in terms of frame rates or resolutions or install sizes or anything. That comes next year almost certainly, but until then we'll just have to wait with bated breath. And until the next video, my friends, thanks for watching. I love you all desperately. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. It actually does help, and subscribe for more videos. Until next time, my friends, much love. I'll see you soon. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.